Welcome to Washington Today for Monday, March 31st, 2025. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thank you for joining us. Global markets saw sharp swings today in advance of President Trump's tariff announcements that are expected on Wednesday. The S&P 500 finished just over 0.5% up after being down over 1% this morning and after one of its worst losses of the past couple of years last week. The Dow Jones Industrial Average also ended up higher after initially following. Decreases on influential tech stocks held down the NASDAQ composite. White House Press Secretary talked about the market response today. We'll hear what she had to say in a minute. Congress is back to work this week. In the Senate, Republicans are aiming to start on their budget plan by Wednesday and using the reconciliation process to avoid having to work with Democrats. This comes on the eve of special elections in two states, Wisconsin and Florida, both seen as early referendums on the Trump agenda. We'll hear from Senate leaders John Thune and Chuck Schumer, and from both sides on those elections coming up. And NASA astronauts Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore are speaking out for the first time following their unexpected 9-month stay on the International Space Station. They said they weren't aware of the interest in their mission by Americans on Earth and that they were honored, humbled, and grateful by the response they received since they've returned. We'll hear from them later in the program. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt spoke to reporters at about 1:15 this afternoon on the White House driveway, and she talked about the scale and scope of the White House tariffs.
Well, I think, first of all, unfortunately, these countries have been ripping off our country for far too long. And they've made, I think, their disdain for the American worker quite clear. If you look at the unfair trade practices that we have, 50% from the European Union on American dairy. You have a 700% tariff from Japan on American rice. You have a 100% tariff from India on American agricultural products. You have nearly a 300% tariff from Canada on American butter and American cheese. This makes it virtually impossible for American products to be imported into these markets, and it has put a lot of Americans out of business and out of work over the past several decades. So it's time for reciprocity, and it's time for a president to take historic change to do what's right for the American people, and that's going to take place on Wednesday.
And what about the scope of them? He said yesterday he would be more generous. What does that mean?
I will let the president make the announcement on Wednesday, but it's certainly going to ensure that there's reciprocity and the American people are treated fairly.
Has anyone determined how many countries are going to see these reciprocal tariffs?
Again, I'll let the president get into the specifics of the announcement, but he has a brilliant team of trade advisors. You have Secretary Bessent, Secretary Lutnick, Jamieson Greer, our U.S. Trade Representative, Peter Navarro, of course, and Kevin Hassett here at the White House, Stephen Miller as well. The Vice President has been deeply involved in these conversations. All of these individuals have presented plans to the president on how to get this done, and it's the president's decision to make, and we will not get ahead of him on the specifics of the announcement.
And has the stock market sell-off caused the White House to rethink any of these plans?
The president has always said that the stock market is a snapshot of a moment in time, and he's doing what's best for Main Street, and Wall Street will work out just fine in this administration, just like they did in their first term.
The Associated Press reporting on the market response today, writing, quote, "The swings follow a global sell-off as worries build that tariffs coming Wednesday from Trump will worsen inflation and grind down growth for the economies." They note that the S&P has lost more than 4% in the first 3 months of the year. That's its worst quarter in 2.5 years. A White House senior trade advisor, Peter Navarro, talked about the tariffs yesterday on Fox News. He said they will raise more than $6 trillion in federal revenue over the next decade.
All right, let's work through the economics of this. First of all, we're going to raise about $100 billion with the auto tariffs alone. What we're going to do is, in the new tax bill that has to pass, it absolutely has to pass, we're going to provide tax benefits, tax credits to the people who buy American cars. This is a genius thing that President Trump promised on the campaign trail. So that's going to happen. In addition, the other tariffs are going to raise about $600 billion a year, about $6 trillion over a 10-year period. And we're going to have tax cuts. It's the biggest tax cut in American history for the middle class, for the blue-collar deplorables. And that is going to, if you look at this, but basically holistically, as they say, consumers and Americans are going to be better off, including all the jobs they get. And then you have gasoline. I don't know if you know this, Shannon, but during the Biden administration, gasoline prices were close to 40% higher, a full dollar higher. If you take a working family and you add that $1 off, if we get our gas prices down, that's more than $1,000 in their pockets. Here's the problem. It's a national security problem, and it goes something like this. We've got 16 million cars we buy every year. Half of those are imported with virtually no American content. And the other half, Shannon, 50% of that is foreign content. And it even gets worse, because what the Germans and the Japanese and the South Koreans are doing is they're turning this country from a manufacturing nation into an assembly nation. What the Germans and Japanese do is they send us the most important high value added, high wage parts of the car here for us to assemble. 19%, only 19% of the cars we drive here and buy each year have American engines and transmissions. Okay. Germany and Japan alone account for 50% of that. So what we're trying to do is get back our manufacturing capability.
ABCnews.com reporting today that analysts widely expect prices to rise on both foreign and U.S.-made cars as a result of the tariffs. Kimberly Palmer, a personal finance expert at NerdWallet, telling ABC News, quote, "It is a really complex situation, but the bottom line for consumers is that the price of cars will be going up. If you know you need to buy a car, it's something you've already decided and worked into your budget, then it could make sense to speed up your timeline." The tariffs were on the mind of Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer. Here's part of what he had to say during Leader Time remarks.
Well, Mr. President, this week, Donald Trump is preparing to take a sledgehammer to the American economy by preparing a tsunami of tariffs on all sorts of goods Americans purchase every day. A tsunami of tariffs. Let's be clear. Donald Trump's tariffs are a tax hike on American families. The average costs families will have to pay for groceries, gas, everyday goods, etc., will go up by thousands of dollars a year out of hardworking people's pockets to pay for these tariffs. And Donald Trump has the gall to call his trade war Liberation Day. That makes as much sense as calling a layoff notice a promotion letter. The Trump administration clearly has no strategy or goal behind their tariffs. One minute they say the tariffs will lead to more people buying American-made goods. But Peter Navarro said yesterday tariffs will also raise trillions in revenue. This is a total contradiction. You can't use tariffs to both raise revenue and bring jobs back. The only way you raise that much in revenue is if Americans pay that much for goods made abroad. And that means consumers will hurt most. Donald Trump knows his plan will send costs surging. He said he hopes automakers raise their price, spoken like a true billionaire. Donald Trump saying, I hope automakers will raise their prices? Okay, Mr. and Mrs. Consumer, Mr. and Mrs. Average American family, Donald Trump wants you to pay more while he's giving tax cuts to billionaires. Senate Republicans, where are they? Always they just go along with whatever Trump wants, no matter how idiotic. Senate Republicans should be shouting from the rooftops to get the president to reverse course on tariffs. People in red states will be especially impacted, from farmers to small businesses. Republicans should be swarming the Senate floor with statements calling on the president to change his mind. But their response has been so feeble, so weak, almost non-existent, that Americans are right to question whose side they are really on. The worst part is nobody knows what these tariffs will look like, perhaps not even Donald Trump. He seems, on a slow day, he changes his mind about them only once a day. He seems to change his mind about them almost every hour. This is not what the American people want. Americans and American businesses detest the chaos and unpredictability that Trump brings. No surprise, more and more Americans now disapprove of his handling of the economy. Meanwhile, the S&P is on track for its worst quarter compared to the rest of the world since the 1980s. Consumer confidence is at its worst since Donald Trump's first term. Outlook for the economy is at a 12-year low. Household debt is on the rise. Donald Trump's trade war is playing Russian roulette with the American economy. and it will be households, retirees, consumers, average families that pay the price.
Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer on the floor earlier today. One Republican senator is speaking out against the tariffs. That's Rand Paul of Kentucky. Here's what he had to say yesterday on WABC Radio in New York.
Well, I think tariffs are bad for any country, and I think they'd be bad for America. And economically, I think they'll hurt us. The stock market, is millions of people voting every day with their pocketbook, and the stock market's very skittish, afraid of tariffs. I live in a state where we have 3 of the big automobile manufacturers. They're all opposed to the tariffs and thinks that it will hurt them. We have the bourbon industry in Kentucky. They don't like the tariffs. I've got farmers. They don't like the tariffs. I really don't have any organized business interested in my state that think they're a good idea. This is just something I disagree with President Trump on. So I'm not for the tariffs, and will continue to speak out on it because really international trade since World War II has made us phenomenally rich. President Trump paints it another way. He says we've been taken advantage of. But I really, really strongly disagree because trade has made us so rich and really has made the world a better place. The more we trade, I think the less we fight.
Is it just a negotiation? Are things going to be settled before then? What is your gut feel?
Sometimes that's true. So, for example, when he threatened tariffs about a month ago, he held off. He said to Mexico, you need to put some troops on the border to control all the crazy, wild, lawless immigration and the fentanyl coming across. And he said the same to Canada. And they both responded pretty quickly. And I wish he would have stopped there because Mexico did agree to send troops to the border. And illegal crossings are way down. So I think he was successful as a negotiation. But if he puts the tariffs on now, there's some people estimating that a car can cost $5,000 to $10,000 more because of tariffs. We still have some inflation left over from the Biden years. And so there are people who are struggling to get a car. There are people struggling to buy a house because of interest rates. And I just don't think it's a good idea to put tariffs on now because I think it'll add to the price of everything.
Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul on WABC Radio in New York. Now, the president is expected to talk to reporters from the Oval Office. That is scheduled for 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And as you just heard, Congress is back in session this week, and on the Senate's agenda, budget reconciliation. Politico reporting today that Senate Republican leaders will move as soon as Wednesday to begin advancing their budget plan. Senate Republican leader John Thune talked about it on the floor this afternoon.
I just want to be very clear. The House and the Senate are united in aiming to do all we can on this. Sure, the instructions we give to our separate committees who are responsible for finding those savings may look a little bit different. But that's not because we don't have a shared commitment to cutting wasteful government spending and saving taxpayer dollars. That's simply a function of Senate rules. In the Senate, if we fail to meet a single savings instruction, even by $1, we lose our ability to consider the legislation under reconciliation rules and the simple majority threshold. And so we have to be careful not to miss the mark on this and to provide flexibility as we chart our bicameral course. But that won't stop us from maximizing savings. Again, on that point, we are committed. But back to the bill that we'll be moving forward. As I said, the budget resolution we will take up will lay the groundwork for legislation to make the 2017 tax cuts permanent. The 2017 tax relief we passed put more money in Americans' families' pockets, with the largest proportional share of the tax relief going to the middle class. And if we don't act to extend this relief, American families will be taking home lower paychecks next year. And along with the President, Senate Republicans are committed to ensuring that we not only extend this relief, but that we make it permanent. Americans should not have to worry about their tax relief expiring every few years. And in addition to making this relief permanent, the bill will also, as I said, invest in securing our border, unleashing American energy, and defending our nation. After years of chaos at our southern border under President Biden, and after years of deficiencies in our military readiness, it's time for a serious investment in border and national security. As I've said before, if we don't get national security right, The rest, Mr. President, is just conversation. And in the past, it is past time to address the deficiencies in our military readiness and to ensure that the good work President Trump is doing to secure the border and remove criminals from our streets can continue. Mr. President, I'm looking forward to taking up our budget resolution in the very near future so that we can deliver permanent tax relief for Americans, provide certainty to the economy, and make a transformational investment in border, energy, and national security. It's going to be a great bill.
Senate Republican leader John Thune on the Senate floor. Politico is reporting today that in order to make the reconciliation process work, the Senate parliamentarian will need to approve a tactic known as, quote, current policy baseline, which will allow them to pursue trillions of dollars in tax cut extensions while claiming it doesn't cost anything. And we heard Senator Thune talk about the differences between the Senate and House budget plan. Eris Foley, congressional reporter for The Hill, talked about that this morning on Washington Journal.
Well, the Senate's bills, the numbers are coming in a little bit lower, but the idea is that it would provide the Senate more flexibility, right? They don't want to write in too high of a number, right? A hard set number that they have to reach versus on the House side, you have conservatives that are dialing up pressure, right? They say they've seen this game before. Leadership promises significant cuts, and then they end up with some compromise deal that comes out of these conversations that do not, in their view, do enough to curb government spending.
And also then, so when the Senate finishes their numbers, the House finishes their numbers, then they have to come meet in the middle. How does that process work?
Right, so there's still a lot of uncertainty as to what compromise budget resolution could look like, but there's been reporting that there could be maybe a different set of instructions, right? Different targets for the House to reach versus the Senate. Senate can have more flexibility. The House can also get what it wants, but it's still up in the air because we haven't seen text yet. So there's a lot of moving parts right now.
Eris Foley, you've mentioned it many times, but tax cuts, is that going to be a must-be requirement for any legislation that goes through?
Right, no, definitely. That's going to be something major that Republicans, no matter what faction you belong to, moderate, hardline, right, mainstream, you of course would want to extend the tax cuts. I think the conversation right now is depending on what this resolution looks like, are they going to be able to gain permanency? Are these tax cuts going to be permanent? And that's a really big motivator on the Senate side as they're picking up these negotiations.
And here's Alex Gadgetano, the Hill's White House reporter, also on this morning's Washington Journal, talking about the White House involvement in this process.
Yeah, they're watching this very closely because, as we know, the president wants something, at least some sort of sign that they're moving ahead on his agenda by the Easter recess. And so I think they'll be putting a lot of pressure on Senate Republicans to keep moving forward and to figure out how to get something done. I mean, he's been very involved with the legislative processes that we've seen over the last 2 months between him, tweeting or posting on Truth Social about how Republicans who don't agree with his agenda should be primaried. So I think we could see some of that if there are some deflections and we hear about some tension within the caucus. And I'm sure Senator John Thune is getting some phone calls from the president this week, but he's very engaged in these kind of talks because he wants, his agenda to get through as quickly as possible. Here at the White House, they're moving so quickly on a lot of big agenda items for him, and I think he wants to see Republicans in Congress step up too.
Now, this afternoon, senators are working on the nomination of Matthew Whitaker to be U.S. ambassador to NATO. A vote on whether to advance his nomination towards confirmation is scheduled for 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. On the House agenda this week, a vote on a bill to limit federal judges' authority to issue injunctions that apply nationwide. That's in response to district court judges temporarily blocking the Trump administration's policies. Also on the House agenda, votes on legislation to require in-person proof of citizenship to register to vote in federal elections. The House is always live on C-SPAN, the Senate on C-SPAN too, and full congressional coverage always available at cspan.org and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. You're listening to Washington Today.
UCLA law professor Stuart Banner's book, The Most Powerful Court in the World, is a history of the United States Supreme Court from the founding era to the present. In his introduction, Stuart Banner writes that Today, critics on the left accuse the justices of deciding cases on political rather than legal grounds. This book shows, he continues, that the Supreme Court critics have always leveled criticism at decisions they did not like. These attacks have usually come from the left because the court has usually been a conservative institution, unquote. Author Banner has a law degree from Stanford and clerked for Sandra Day O'Connor in 1991.
Author Stuart Banner with his book, The Most Powerful Court in the World, A History of the Supreme Court of the United States, on this episode of Book Notes Plus with our host, Brian Lamb. Book Notes Plus is available on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Washington Today. The Supreme Court heard oral arguments today in a case brought by Catholic-affiliated charitable groups who say they were wrongly denied religious exemptions from a Wisconsin state tax that funds unemployment benefits. NBCNews.com writing today that justices, quote, appeared sympathetic to the claim that the state's tests for determining whether a group could get the exemption violates the First Amendment. You can see the entire oral argument at cspan.org. And Wisconsin, one of two states holding closely watched special elections tomorrow. The New York Times writing today, quote, as a torrent of money from outside Wisconsin has made the contest the most expensive judicial race in American history, voters across the state said they had come to see this election to fill a single Supreme Court seat, more as a referendum on the early months of President Trump's second term. Fueling that perception is roughly $20 million that Elon Musk and groups allied with him have spent to boost the conservative candidate, Brad Schimel. The liberal candidate, Susan Crawford, has decried Mr. Musk's spending as an attempt to place a lackey on the state's top court. That from the New York Times. The other state holding special elections, Florida. In the 1st Congressional District, Republican Jimmy Patronis and Democrat Gay Vallimont are running to replace former Republican Representative Matt Gaetz. And in the 6th Congressional District, Republican State Senator Randy Fine is facing Democrat Josh Weil to fill the seat vacated by current National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. Both districts are solidly Republican, but the race in the 6th is unexpectedly close. Recent polls show Josh Weil within 3 points of Randy Fine, and according to CNN.com, Josh Weil has outraised his opponent by a margin of 10-1, a disparity that, quote, sent shockwaves from Florida to Washington when first reported in federal campaign finance filings earlier this month. Josh Weil talked about his race yesterday on MSNBC.
I came into this because of the threat to the Department of Education. The impact that eliminating the federal Department of Education would have on schools here in Florida would be devastating. We have some of the lowest per student funding in the country, and so the federal funding makes up a much larger percentage of our budget here. To lose that money, which is what will happen if it's given to the state, because our governor is Ron DeSantis, and he will take every last dollar he can out of our public schools, would result in school closures, school consolidations, increases in class sizes. You know, that's not a partisan issue. It was something that I felt needed to get out to every person in this district to understand the implications. And since we've gotten here, I found that, you know, there's much more urgent matters for a lot of the residents. More than 25% of our district is age 65 and above. They are deeply concerned about what's going on in Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare, the cuts that they've seen, the changes to the program. Our veterans here felt the impact of those cuts in the VA immediately. Within 48 hours, they were having their doctor's appointments, scheduled procedures and operations pushed back 4 to 6 months. There is an immediate threat to people living here in this district, and they want someone in Washington fighting for them.
And here's Florida Republican Congressman Byron Donalds, who talked about both Wisconsin and Florida yesterday on Fox News.
Well, look, special elections are always different. Democrats obviously are highly motivated because they took a shellacking last November. They don't like DOJ. They don't like that Donald Trump is making America great again. And so they're going to the polls. As long as Republicans turn out in Congressional District 6 in Florida, which, by the way, the voting reports from the last couple days show that Republican votes are surging in that congressional district. But as long as Republican voters get to the polls and vote, they're going to be just fine. And I'll be remiss if I don't add the Supreme Court race going on in Wisconsin. Same dynamic. Democrat voters, because of their their dramatic losses last November. They're motivated. Republican voters, we have to get to the polls. We got to show up and vote in Wisconsin for the Supreme Court race. And in Florida, Congressional District 6, Congressional District 1, Republican voters have to turn out. They got to show up. Election Day's Tuesday. And if you want Donald Trump to be successful in his mission to make America great again, Republicans have to continue to go to the polls.
Florida Republican Representative Byron Donalds yesterday on Fox News Sunday. NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams held their first question and answer session with reporters since returning to Earth on March 18th. The two took off to dock with the International Space Station back in June 2024 as part of a test flight of Boeing's new Starliner crew capsule. Now, they were supposed to return about 8 days later, but problems plagued the mission, and NASA ultimately decided to bring the Starliner home uncrewed. That left them on the ISS until February. And then issues with the SpaceX capsule that was used to pick them up caused further delays that lasted into this month. The astronauts said today they were surprised by the interest in their mission by Americans back on Earth.
I would have to say yes, absolutely. You know, it's interesting. We go and launch. We knew it was a little bit unique, obviously, first time flying on a new spacecraft. So yeah, that was interesting. But you know, then life goes on up there. And I mentioned yesterday, you know, we pivoted and we are International Space Station crew members, and we're doing what all of our other friends in the astronaut office do: is go and work and train and do amazing science experiments up on the International Space Station. So you know, I think you sort of get maybe a little bit tunnel visioned in what your job is. So do your job type of thing, right? And so you're not really aware of what else is going on down here. I hate to say that. You know, maybe the world doesn't revolve around us, but we revolve around the world, like something like that. But you know, I think we were just really focused on what we were doing and trying to be part of the team and making sure we pulled our weight for the team. Of course, we heard some things, and I'll let obviously hand this off to Butch. Heard some stuff from our friends and family that people were interested and wondering what was going on and concerned about our health and all that kind of stuff while we were up there. But I mean, we were just part of the team doing the job, filling in wherever we could, and then knowing that there's rotational flights and we will be coming home eventually on a rotational flight. So no, I don't think we were aware to the degree. Pretty honored and humbled by the fact of when we came home, like, wow, there are a lot of people who are interested, very thankful, very amazed that we could hopefully be one positive element to bring people together.
Yeah, I don't know that there's much I could add to that. Just thankful for a nation that cares, a nation that prays, and a nation that is involved in the processes that are important to all of us.
Okay, we'll take our next question here in the room. Tom, go ahead.
Hi, Tom Costello with NBC News. Again, welcome back. Nice to see you all. Everybody's been thinking about you and worried about you. And I'm wondering, once you got your feet back on terra firma, what's the first thing both of you wanted to do? And were there any foods you were craving after 9+ months?
Go ahead, Senator.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to hug my husband and hug my dogs. And I'll say that in that order, but maybe not. No, I'm just joking. But of course, food. Something that's just like for home for me, like something that is very, reminds you of home. And my father was a vegetarian, so I had a good grilled cheese sandwich when I got home. So that reminded me of him.
Yeah, certainly embracing the family again, but also the opportunity. And I've already said it a couple of times. Is just to say thank you to a nation that got involved in all of this. It makes it special, not just for us, but for all, I think our nation as a whole. So thank you.
Part of a press conference with astronauts Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore. Both of them ended up spending 286 total days in space. That's 278 days longer than what was scheduled. They circled the Earth 4,576 times and traveled 121 million miles by the time they splashed down off the coast of Florida. You can see their entire discussion with reporters at cspan.org and C-SPAN Now. The family of former Wyoming Republican Senator Alan Simpson held a memorial service at a church in Cody, Wyoming today. Senator Simpson died on March 14th at the age of 93 after struggling to recover from a broken hip. At today's memorial, the senator's daughter, Sue Simpson Gallagher, talked about one of the ways she's honoring her father.
As we celebrate Dad's legacy, I am committed to being kinder and not hesitating to reach out to others. I am committed to keeping the list of people, places, and things that I love substantially longer than those that I don't. Actually, not even having that other list, the one that includes extremists and sycophants, is what he would say is a better way to live a life.
Alan Simpson served 3 terms in the Senate from 1979 to 1997. You can see all of today's service and all of his hundreds of C-SPAN appearances at cspan.org and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. That's also where you can find this program as a podcast. You can also find it on YouTube. Just search Washington Today. And for more of the stories that are shaping Washington every day, get our daily email word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal, our live forum inviting you to discuss the latest issues in government, politics, and public policy from Washington, D.C. to across the country. And coming up Tuesday morning, we'll talk about legal actions against the Trump administration and potential congressional action against the courts and judges with the president of Judicial Watch, Tom Fitton. And then Center for Election Innovation and Research founder David Becker discusses President Trump's executive order requiring proof of U.S. citizenship to register to vote in federal elections. And we'll preview the special elections in Florida's 1st and 6th congressional districts with Politico's Kimberly Leonard. C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Join the conversation live at 7 Eastern Tuesday morning on C-SPAN, C-SPAN Now, our free mobile app, or online at cspan.org.